from 2015. In the midst of a zombie apocalypse, a company called Phenotrans has developed an injection which they have named Zombrex, capable of making an infected person continue to live normally, as long as they take one injection a day. Wanting to do a story, reporter Chase Carter and his camera Blair go inside a quarantine zone, but when they get there, they realize that the people are without water and food, only doses of Zombrex. To expose the situation, the two record a report, and when they finish, Chase says he wants to get out of there as soon as possible. But Blair insists that they should continue recording and collecting reports from the people in the queues. To do this, the reporter goes up to a woman called Crystal and asks her to express her indignation in front of the cameras, but instead of just bad-mouthing the government, she also attacks the press, saying that they record people's difficulties just to sell commercials. After venting, Crystal leaves and leaves the reporters alone, but Chase refuses to settle for just that and decides to record one of the tents. When she realizes that her colleague wants to expose infected people, Blair says it's wrong and leaves, leaving the reporter to record on his own. Alone, Chase enters the tent and records doctors and patients with his cell phone. As he is leaving, the reporter bumps into a man who falls to the ground and begins to turn into a zombie, just seconds after taking a dose of Zombrex. Outside, Blair goes into the crowd and records the exact moment when a man falls to the ground and also begins to transform. Suddenly, the zombie gets up and tries to attack her, forcing the woman to defend herself by hitting the camera in the zombie's face. As Blair rushes to the parking lot, the people inside the tents transform and the doctors try to inject new doses of Zombrex to save them, but to no avail. In the parking lot, Blair manages to get into the station's car and waits for Chase to arrive, but the zombies are getting closer and she is forced to flee alone. At this point, the reporter finally manages to get out of the tent and runs to the parking lot, but as Blair is already driving away, he has to find another way to escape. Suddenly, he sees Crystal finishing off a zombie and runs to her for help, jumping behind a concrete wall along with her. Desperate, the two run under an overpass to try and escape, but halfway there, Chase ends up falling and is caught by a zombie that grabs his foot. Crystal doesn't stop to help and continues running as if nothing had happened, but the reporter manages to eliminate the zombie on his own and continues after the woman. A few meters ahead, Crystal finds a woman called Maggie next to the body of her own daughter, discovering that the girl has been transformed and that's why her mother was forced to take her life. With more zombies on the way, Crystal and Chase take Maggie into a vehicle and drive away with a zombie hanging from the door. After smashing the creature against a wall, Crystal asks what happened in the tents and Chase replies that the Zombrex no longer works. Wanting to spread the word, he calls his station and tells them live everything he saw in the tents, leaving the audience on alert. While Chase gives his report, Crystal and Maggie talk about a way out when they run over a zombie that appears in front of them. Trying not to get bitten by the creature, they end up losing control of the car and crashing into another parked vehicle. With the zombie stuck in the windshield, Crystal decides to abandon them and runs into a pawn shop. After some time trying to start the car, Maggie realizes that it is no longer working and runs towards the store with Chase, who begs Crystal to open the door. After a while, she finally lets them in and starts looking for something they can use as a weapon, but as all they find is old junk, they have to build something useful with their own hands. On the other side of town, Blair encounters a roadblock set up by the police and is barred from entering, being taken to a quarantine tent by an officer of Agent Norton, the leader of FEZA, the zombie fighting agency. A few hours later, Chase wakes up to hear a strange noise outside and gets up to investigate, catching the exact moment when Crystal injects a dose of Zombrex into her own arm. But unlike the others, which had no effect, for some reason the injection works and prevents the woman from turning. Unsure of what to do, the reporter calls Blair and tells her what he saw, leaving her curious as to how Zombrex still works in Crystal. As she still has no information, Blair says that she is the chance for them to find out what happened and asks Chase to keep following her for as long as he can. Sometime later, Agent Norton arrives at the tent and performs a test to confirm that Blair does not have the virus. Assured that she is healthy, the FEZA leader finally allows her to leave the tent and she takes the opportunity to talk about Crystal's case, but without any proof that the story is true, the man says there is nothing he can do. Just then, a military convoy arrives and Blair takes several photos. After landing, General Lyons holds a press conference and informs everybody that he has received authorization to bomb the area in the next 48 hours. Unaware of the bombing, Chase goes to Crystal and asks why the injection still works, discovering that she has her own supplier and doesn't use the Zombrex distributed by Phenotrans. With only one dose left and chaos spreading through the city, Crystal needs to find new injections as soon as possible. But just as she's about to leave, a group of bikers arrive to loot and she runs for cover. Looking for something useful, Logan, the leader of the gang, enters the pawnshop and starts rummaging around, but just as he's about to leave, he sees a makeshift shield that Crystal has made and approaches to take a look. While looking at the object, he hears a sound coming from inside the store and goes to investigate, meeting Crystal, who points a revolver at the back of his head. Seeing that it's a girl, Logan gets quite confident and starts laughing, but the woman isn't intimidated and unlocks her gun, asking for the biker's sword and showing that she's not messing around. Just then, another biker enters the store and starts looking for Logan, but instead of trying to call for help, the man decides to just back away and leaves, taking the shield with him. Outside, a couple come across the biker gang and decide to ask for help, but Logan doesn't listen and knocks the man out with one punch, getting on his bike to chase the woman who starts running. Frightened, the girl runs through the streets until she is surrounded by a group of zombies. Desperate, she asks for Logan's help and apologizes for running, but the biker only replies that he doesn't give rides and drives off, leaving the woman alone to be devoured by the zombies. In the pawnshop, Crystal and Maggie build makeshift weapons while Chase tells them that they don't need to leave, because as soon as they hear her story, the army will stop the bombing and come to rescue them. As she doesn't want to expose herself, the woman says it will never happen and leaves with Maggie, leaving the reporter behind. Refusing to be left alone, he goes to the warehouse and finds a circular saw, using it to slice up the zombies. While Crystal and Maggie try to follow unnoticed, Chase goes off screaming and cutting up everything he finds along the way, but the saw ends up jamming and he grabs a baseball bat to finish the job. Even though the zombies are extremely slow, the man ends up being disarmed and has to tear off an arm to defend himself, using the limb as a club. Surrounded, Chase enters the school bus seeking shelter, but the zombies also manage to enter the vehicle and he has to escape through the emergency exit. On top of a car, the reporter looks for a way to escape and ends up being knocked down by some zombies, but manages to get up and climbs onto the roof of the bus. From there, he jumps on top of an SUV and enters an apparently empty alley, using a screwdriver to close the door and block the passage. Thinking he's safe, the reporter runs down the alley where he ends up meeting a policeman and a zombie clown. Alone against the two, Chase throws everything he can find in their direction and ends up putting a propeller through the policeman's head. The man then grabs the exhaust pipe of a car and hits the former officer full in the face, causing him to drop his gun. Desperate, Chase runs for his pistol and hits the zombie in the head, but the clown is still standing and starts attacking him with his axe. To defend himself, he points the pistol at the zombie bozo's nose and pulls the trigger, but unluckily for him, the gun is out of ammunition and he ends up being knocked down by the zombified version of Krusty. About to be devoured, Chase is saved at the last second by Crystal, who runs over the zombie with a van, ripping the clown's head off. Just then, the screwdriver falls and the other zombies get closer and closer, forcing Chase to get into the car so they can get away as soon as possible. In the quarantine zone, Blair goes to Norton to ask about the stock of Zombrex and is completely ignored, but when she returns to her car, she finds a sheet containing the location of all the supplies. With the information in hand, the woman gives the coordinates of the warehouse and Crystal drives straight there, finding the place apparently abandoned. Inside, the group searches for supplies and Maggie ends up getting separated from the rest of the group, ending up in a room where she finds a zombie that looks extremely similar to her daughter. Completely beside herself, Maggie leaves the door open and approaches the girl to hug her, squeezing as hard as she can while the infected girl bites her neck. Not realizing that the woman is gone, Chase and Crystal walk around the place and find a zombie biker with several Zombrex injections next to him, making them realize that this batch isn't working either. Wanting to prove that the injections were sabotaged, Chase suggests that Crystal take a dose and says that if they can prove that the Zombrex has been tampered with, the military will come personally to rescue them. Frustrated, the woman slices the zombie biker with her improvised weapon and asks the reporter to prepare his camera. When it comes time to take the daily dose, Chase starts recording with his cell phone and tells Crystal's case, saying that she is infected and showing the moment when she takes the dose of Zombrex from the government. After proving that the injection didn't work, Crystal takes the last dose that still works and prepares to inject it, but before she can do so, her transformation process begins and she loses control of her own body. Desperate, Chase puts his cell phone on the table and injects the girl's arm, ending the transformation and making her body stabilize. At that moment, the zombies that escaped manage to catch up with them and Chase begins to carry Crystal towards a door, but when they reach the other side, they discover that there is only a balcony and that they are trapped. After realizing that they are surrounded by zombies, Crystal takes Chase's phone and posts the recording on the internet, which has more than 3 million views and has been broadcast on all TV channels. Seeing the video, Blair calls Chase to congratulate him on the recording, but completely surrounded, the reporter says it doesn't matter now and thanks her for being a good friend. After ending the call, the man hears the sound of approaching engines and hides to watch, seeing the exact moment when the biker gang arrives and one of them is bitten by a zombie. Ruthless as ever, Logan doesn't think twice and shoots his partner in the head, making Crystal realize just how crazy he is. Wanting to save his friend, Blair goes to Norton's tent and tells him where Chase is, asking him to send someone to rescue him, but the man says he can't do that and she decides to ask the general for help. After showing the video of Crystal taking Zombrex, Blair asks Lyons if he can rescue them and the military officer says that he is not in charge of the quarantine, but that if he were, he would send a platoon to rescue the people before the bombing. Back at the warehouse, one of the bikers notices the zombies clustered around the door and approaches to investigate, finishing off the zombie and finding the 2 survivors. Happy to be reunited with Crystal, Logan hits Chase, who begins to lose consciousness, seeing only blurs as the men take the woman away. In the quarantine zone, Norton and General Lyons give a live interview and Blair asks about the video, but obviously, the leader of the zombie fighting agency denies that the doses have been tampered with and says that the quarantine is a success. Blair then asks the general if he would say the same and Lyons replies that they are about to destroy a city they were supposed to save, which makes Norton visibly embarrassed. After this fiasco, FEZA was withdrawn from circulation and the army became responsible for quarantine. Shortly after being promoted, General Lyons goes to Blair and tells her that he sent a team to the warehouse, but that they found absolutely nothing, just a few zombies. Thinking Chase is gone, the military man says he's sorry and thanks her for her help, saying that many lives have been saved because of it. In the warehouse, Chase wakes up to one of the bikers tying his arms to a forklift and turning on the radio to attract the zombies, all to watch as the reporter tries to escape. Desperate, the man knocks over the sound trying to turn it off, but even after the fall, the device continues to work normally and attracts more and more zombies. Suddenly, a zombie appears behind Chase's back and grabs hold of the gas cylinder, releasing the hose and causing a large amount of flammable vapor to leak out uncontrollably. As if that wasn't bad enough, another zombie who is approaching ends up passing close to the fire and has his arm covered in flames. With his limb on fire, he gets closer and closer to the gas leak, which increases Chase's desperation even more. At that moment, the reporter sees a zombie with a knife in its back and decides to use it to free himself, attracting the creature and trapping it with his foot. In this way, he manages to cut the rope with the knife and escapes from the forklift just as the burning zombie approaches the gas. In the middle of the explosion, the knife that was on the infected man's back flies through the air and hits the biker who was watching right in the chest, eliminating him instantly. After the impact, the reporter gets up and immediately calls Blair to tell her he's leaving the warehouse, which makes the woman realize that the general lied about having sent a platoon. Knowing that something is wrong, the camera asks Chase not to tell anyone who he is when he arrives in the quarantine zone. After the call, the reporter gets on a motorcycle and starts riding around the warehouse looking for Crystal, attracting a small zombie army along with him. At the top of the warehouse, Logan takes Crystal into a room and they start talking. During the conversation, the woman sees a knife in the biker's boot and tries to approach him to steal it, but the man notices and grabs her by the neck, throwing Crystal away. With the woman seated, Logan takes a time bomb and activates it, saying that if the army doesn't blow it up, he'll blow up the military base himself. After the outburst, the biker deactivates the bomb's timer and orders Crystal to kneel down, giving her the chance to grab the knife. However, Logan was expecting this and manages to grab her arm. Even so, Crystal reacts by punching the man in the crotch and biting off his ear. While Logan is recovering from the pain, the woman shows him the bite mark on her arm and says that he will soon become a zombie too, which makes the man furious. Taking advantage of the gap, Crystal tries to run and ends up being caught by another biker who throws her on top of the Zombrex stockpile, right where she eliminated the first zombie biker. As soon as she realizes this, she crawls to her old improvised weapon and manages to hit the biker on the head, but she doesn't have enough strength to make him go away and ends up being captured. Wanting to make Crystal pay for what she's done, Logan tells his partner that they shouldn't eliminate her yet, but changes his mind when Chase arrives with his army of zombies. Desperate, the girl fights for her life and manages to grab the biker's shotgun, hitting him right in the chest. Right next to him, the reporter lunges at Logan and manages to electrocute him with an improvised weapon, but the biker leader remains standing and begins to squeeze his neck. To help her friend, Crystal hits a shotgun attack that knocks Logan down, allowing them to run to the motorcycle. While trying to recover from the blow, the biker ends up being surprised by the zombie Maggie, who starts devouring him while he's still alive. Unaware that Chase is going to the quarantine zone, General Lyons gives another interview and says that Phenotrans has managed to develop a chip capable of keeping an infected person in human form for more than a year, saying that this will end the quarantine zones and there will be no new bombings. After the interview, Blair goes to Norton to talk about what happened and discovers that he never put the note with the coordinates in his car. Norton then says that Phenotrans came up with the chips a year ago, but as this infringes on civil rights, Norton refused to implant them in people. Now, the army itself has set things up with Phenotrans to take FEZA out of control and allow the chip to be implanted in people. Wanting to gather more evidence, the two start checking the photos and Blair realizes that the army already had the chips when they arrived in the quarantine zone. Even with this proof, the woman goes to the general and starts asking questions in an attempt to find out new information, but Lyons realizes that she is recording the conversation and orders his men to go after her. Unaware that she is being followed, Blair meets up with Norton, who has managed to steal one of the army's laptops. With the photos of the warehouse that Chase sent, the former FEZA leader decides to check the lot in the military records and discovers that the warehouse shipment came from Fort Carson, General Lyons' base. With so much evidence piling up, Norton tells Blair to get ready and walks back to his tent to pack his things, but after a few steps, he ends up being knocked out by a soldier. When Blair sees this, she runs outside, but she knows it's no use trying to hide and records a video telling Chase everything, as well as putting the camera and her cell phone with all the information inside a newspaper machine. At that moment, Chase and Crystal approach the quarantine zone and the military ask them to walk very slowly. Suddenly, the two hear something approaching and run for cover when Logan arrives with the van. When they saw the suspect, the soldiers asked him to turn down the sound and the man got out of the car and fired a grenade launcher, releasing smoke bombs that blocked the soldiers' view. Even though they can't see, the soldiers start shooting wildly, which ends up attracting the zombies nearby. With his giant army of zombies, Logan reactivates the time bomb attached to an axe and begins to advance towards the barricade. Since the military can't do anything to help, Chase and Crystal run to the truck of a gardening company and each get out a chainsaw. But even in 2 versus 1, they don't manage to hit the biker, who almost smashes Chase's head in with an axe. Wanting to defend her friend, Crystal goes after Logan and ends up making way for the reporter to shove his chainsaw into his back. But even so, the biker still stands and strikes back with an axe. With Chase down, Crystal tries to hit the crazy biker with her motor saw, but ends up being disarmed by the man who is preparing to drive the axe into her head. To save her, the reporter jumps on the weapon, but is easily knocked down and the two end up being caught by the zombies. Victorious, Logan throws the axe towards the barricade with the intention of blowing it up, but Chase refuses to let this happen and runs towards the quarantine zone. Taking advantage of the fact that the former biker leader is turning, Crystal takes the chainsaw and tries to cut him in half, but Logan has already turned into a zombie and manages to stay on his feet. At that moment, Chase reaches for the axe and throws it at the zombie biker's back, causing him to explode into a million pieces. With that, the two survivors are finally allowed to enter the quarantine zone and Crystal is taken to the infirmary, where one of the army doctors begins to look after her. While he waits, Chase puts his cell phone on the charger and finally manages to turn it back on, noticing Blair's many missed calls. Wanting to meet her again, the reporter asks to be excused and leaves the tent to call her, but as soon as he does, the nurse implants the chip in Crystal without her realizing it. Outside, Chase calls Blair and starts to hear the phone ringing. Following the noise, he finds the newspaper machine and discovers the hidden camera and cell phone, finally gaining access to all the information Blair has discovered, as well as the exact recording of the moment she was captured. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie reviews.